The vast chamber of the Galactic Council unfolded before Catherine Wells like a sanctuary carved from living crystal. Radiance from 3 remote suns streamed through the translucent walls and scattered rainbow colors across the ground where she stood isolated. Surrounding her, seated on tiered platforms that ascended toward the rounded ceiling, the delegates from 12 alien nations observed her with gazes filled with pure disdain. Catherine was 53 years old. She had worked as Earth's envoy to the Interstellar Alliance for 11 years. She had endured tense diplomatic standoffs before. She had suffered scorn and intimidation from species that viewed humanity as little more than intruders among the stars. Yet she had never sensed the burden of malice quite this strongly. Admiral Marcus's uniform was sharp and deep blue, marked with the silver eagles of Earth's command. His face revealed no expression, but Catherine had known him long enough to see the tightness in his jaw. He was furious. He was forcing it down with all the discipline he possessed. High Chancellor Zyroth of the Verithori Dominion rose from his obsidian throne positioned at the center of the highest tier. He was tall and slender, his gray skin seeming to swallow light rather than cast it back. 4 eyes arranged in a diamond across his elongated features locked onto Catherine with icy accuracy. When he spoke, his voice reverberated across the hall like stones sinking into a vast pit. He announced that humanity had been summoned to answer for violations against the Galactic Order. He claimed that the primitive species from the small blue planet called Earth had grown too bold and too swiftly. He charged them with seizing sectors on the outer rim belonging to ancient and wiser civilizations. He demanded to know what authority humanity had to grasp for stars that were never intended for them. Catherine parted her lips to reply, but the laughter arrived first. It spilled across the room from every platform, from every species present. The Kralith envoys, towering beasts with plated hides and tusks like curved weapons, hammered their fists into their seats. The Sindari, graceful creatures, with silver bodies and triple-jointed limbs, produced high whistles that their translators turned into sneering giggles. Even the normally silent Omarathi, whose forms were made of living shadow, rippled with dark humor. The Crit War leader, Admiral Vexisnar, pushed himself upright and jabbed one thick finger toward Catherine. His translator flattened his growls into clipped English. He called humanity a brood of frightened mammals who forged their vessels from scavenged junk. He said Earth's defense forces were a farce that even the youngest crit fighter could crush one-handed. He suggested humans should slither back into the dirt that birthed them before someone taught them what real power meant. More laughter, more scorn. Catherine sensed Admiral Cole shift subtly behind her. She knew exactly what he wished to do. She desired it as well. But she had long ago accepted that rage was a privilege diplomats could never indulge. The Sinindari representative, a female called Sarah, spoke next. Her voice was gentle and melodious, which made her remarks all the more wounding. She proposed that humanity surrender its colonies without delay. She recommended the Council's species divide human territories among themselves equitably. She said such an outcome would be a kindness. After all, humans were obviously incapable of managing their own responsibilities among the stars. Chancellor Zero lifted one long hand for silence. The chamber fell still. He peered down at Catherine with something resembling sympathy. Had it not been so tainted by arrogance, she might have believed it. He offered humanity a single option: relinquish everything they had established beyond their home system. Withdraw their fleets and their citizens to Earth and the few barren rocks circling their modest yellow sun. Accept their status as a minor species under Council oversight. If face the consequences. Catherine asked what those consequences might be. Zero smiled. Or at least his features shifted in the way humans had learned to interpret as a smile. He said the united armadas of the Council species totaled more than 20,000 warships. He said those armadas could turn Earth into cinders and shards within a single turning of their insignificant moon. He said humanity's 500 defense craft would offer entertainment for perhaps an hour before being brushed aside like debris. The chamber waited. Every gaze in the hall remained locked on Catherine Wells. She requested a window to communicate with her government. She kept her tone even and controlled. She did not plead. She refused to display fear. She merely asked for what any envoy would request: under circumstances like these. Zyroth consulted quietly with the other high-ranking envoys. Then he approved her request. Humanity would have until first light of the next Varith cycle to provide their response. That equaled roughly 18 standard hours. After that deadline, the Armadas would depart. As Catherine began to turn away, Zero delivered one last decree. He said that by the same time tomorrow, Earth would either submit to the Council or Earth would be destroyed. There existed no other path. Catherine exited the chamber with Admiral Cole walking beside her. Neither spoke until they reached the secure suite where the remainder of their small delegation waited anxiously. Then Cole sealed the door and engaged the privacy fields. He asked her what course she wished to take. Catherine dropped heavily into a chair. She felt drained. She felt furious. But beneath both of those feelings, something deeper stirred. Something that had been waiting for this moment for an exceptionally long time. She told Cole to contact General Andrew Stone at Soul Command. She told him to use the quantum channel, the one that could never be tapped or traced. She told him to send only a single word. Cole nodded. He understood instantly. He had been waiting as well. The word was Ghostfall. 6 hours later, across 17 scattered star systems, humanity's openly deployed war fleet began shutting down. Vessels that had been guarding borders went dark. Communications arrays went silent. Crew members left their posts following procedures they had memorized for years, though they'd never imagined they would actually use them. By the time dawn's first light touched the crystalline towers of Varith Prime, every human warship had slipped beyond detection, and the aliens who had mocked Earth in the council chamber saw nothing but empty void where human craft had once hovered. It appeared as though the entire fleet had never existed at all. Catherine Wells slept easily that night. She dreamed of phantoms rising from the black between the stars, and in her dream, the phantoms were smiling. Morning arrived on Varith Prime, with the slow ascent of 3 suns over the crystal horizon. The council hall filled once more with delegates from 12 civilizations, each wearing triumphant pride on their alien features. They gathered expecting to witness humanity's surrender. Catherine Wells waited alone in the center of the vast hall. Admiral Cole and the military envoys had departed in the night without any explanation. She had not asked their destination. She already knew. Now she faced the sneering council by herself, her hands resting calmly before her, her expression revealing nothing. Chancellor Zero entered last. He walked with ceremony to his obsidian seat and settled into it like a monarch, preparing to accept tribute from a defeated people. His 4 eyes swept across the assembly until they fixed on Catherine, standing small and solitary on the polished floor. He asked whether humanity was ready to offer its decision. Before Catherine could respond, Admiral Vex's Narv the Kralith rose with barely contained excitement. He announced that all human military vessels had vanished from their known positions in every monitored region. He said sensor outposts across the galaxy had verified it. Every human warship was gone. Not destroyed. Not retreating in formation. Simply gone, as though wiped from reality. Laughter rolled through the chamber once more. The Sinandari envoy, Sarah, covered her mouth with 3 slender fingers as she giggled softly. The Omarathi shadows rippled with dark humor. Even the typically rigid Varithri officers allowed themselves thin, satisfied smiles. Vexnar proclaimed that humanity had run in fear. He said their crude ships had likely scattered into the endless void where they would drift until their power failed and their crews perished. He called humans cowards of the lowest order. He said it was almost disappointing that no battle would come. Zero lifted his hand for quiet. He looked down at Catherine with exaggerated pity. He said, perhaps surrender was unnecessary now. Perhaps humanity had already accepted its downfall. Perhaps their ambassador wished to plead for mercy for her trembling species. Catherine did not reply. She merely stood there, hands folded, eyes steady. A faint ghost of a smile touched the corner of her lips. Corner of her lips? On Earth, 12,000 light-years away. Dr. Helen Carter observed the unfolding situation from the Global Defense Nexus. The installation lay buried deep under the Rocky Mountains. Secured by 3 miles of dense granite and protected by technology even the Council races had never imagined. Walls of screens surrounded her, each streaming data from covert sensor arrays hidden throughout the galaxy. Commander Nathan Price stood at her side, overseeing the final stage of Ghostfall through a floating holographic console. He was young for such authority, only 34. Yet he had been selected because his mind processed information faster than anyone else in Earth Command. His hands swept across the controls with trained precision as he monitored the movements of vessels that officially did not exist. The Council species were assembling their combined armada. 17,000 warships from 12 civilizations were organizing at the rally point in the Varith system. They would begin their course toward Earth within hours. Certain of their unmatched strength, they believed they were about to crush a helpless world. Price reviewed the status of every hidden asset once more. Everything aligned. Everything prepared. 2 centuries of planning had brought them to this point. He allowed himself a faint nod of approval. Dr. Carter expanded the visual relay from the Council chamber on Varith Prime. She watched. Catherine Wells standing alone amid the scornful aliens. She admired the ambassador's composure. It required a rare sort of courage to stand in the lion's jaws and smile. Back in the crystal chamber, Chancellor Zyroth was issuing his final decree. He announced that the united fleet of the Council races would launch for Earth immediately. He said 17,000 warships would make the 3-day voyage to the Sol system. He vowed humanity's homeworld would be shattered into ruins within hours of their arrival. He declared that any human hoping to survive should begin pleading to whatever primitive gods their species still revered. The fleet commanders acknowledged their orders. Across the Varith sector, colossal warships began awakening their engines. The Kralith dreadnoughts loomed largest dark mountains of metal bristling with armaments able to tear planets apart. The Sinandari cruisers were sleek and silver, built for speed and surgical assault. The Varithiri battleships were crystalline, like their homeworld, beautiful and lethal in equal measure. They broadcast their march on every open channel. They wanted humanity to hear them coming. They wanted humans to spend 3 days drowning in dread, watching their doom creep closer through the stars. It was the final cruelty of species who considered them beneath contempt. Catherine listened to the transmissions. On her private communicator, she heard their boasting and their threats. She heard Admiral Vexnar describe how he would personally crush Earth's orbital defenses. She heard Sarah discuss how human children would make excellent servants after the conquest. Then another signal arrived. It flowed through networks the Council races did not even know existed. It appeared only as plain text on her display, visible to her eyes alone. The message read, "Stand firm. The old gods are rising." Catherine read the line 3 times. Then she erased it and returned her gaze to the chamber. Chancellor Zyroth was still speaking, still threatening, still reveling in a triumph he believed already secured. She smiled. Not the faint smile from before, but a true one. The kind of smile that made the Sinandari envoy hesitate mid-sentence. The kind of smile that made even Zero stumble for a heartbeat. The aliens did not understand. They could never understand. They saw a single human standing before the assembled might of 12 civilizations. They saw a representative of a species that had seemingly lost its entire military force. They saw prey too ignorant to feel fear. They did not see what Catherine saw. They did not know what waited in the darkness between the stars. They had mocked Earth and the Council and passed judgment on humanity, without imagining that perhaps they were the ones who should be afraid. The old gods were rising in. They were very, very hungry. Catherine Wells stood alone in the Crystal Hall and watched the alien armada depart for her homeworld. She did not pray. She did not cry. She merely waited with the calm certainty of someone who knew exactly what would follow. The allied alien fleet swept through space like a swarm of furious insects. 17,000 warships stretched across millions of kilometers, their engines burning bright against the eternal night. They had been traveling for 2 days, and the Sol system grew clearer on their sensors with every passing hour. Admiral Vexnar stood upon the command bridge of his flagship, the Kralith Dreadnought Worldbreaker. He watched the tactical display with satisfaction as his fleet held flawless formation. The humans had made no attempt at resistance. No desperate strikes, no last-minute diplomacy. Nothing but silence from the species foolish enough to defy the Council's dominion. His sensor officer reported an anomaly. Massive gravitational distortions were appearing near the edge of the Sol system. The readings were strange, unlike anything stored in their archives. The distortions seemed to pulse in steady intervals, almost like heartbeats. Bexnar ignored the warning. He said it was likely a natural event, perhaps an unstable debris field or a collapsing comet. He ordered the fleet to hold both course and velocity. Earth was a mere 18 hours away now. He would not be sidetracked by scientific oddities. In Europa's shadow, buried beneath 3 kilometers of ancient ice, Captain Lisa Morgan stood on the bridge of the carrier vessel Avalon. She was 38, with close-cut dark hair and eyes like hardened steel. She had commanded ships for 15 years, yet this was the first time she commanded one that officially did not exist. Around her, 300 human vessels waited in perfect silence. Their engines were dormant. Their systems rested on minimal power. Their hulls were coated in compounds that swallowed sensor waves the way a sponge drinks water. To outside detection, they were absent-only empty void where nothing stirred. But these were not the ships the Council believed they knew. General Andrew Stone's voice sounded through the quantum cryptid channel. He addressed the entire hidden armada at once. His words reached every vessel stationed across the Sol system and beyond. He spoke with the calm certainty of a man who had spent 40 years preparing for this single moment. He told them the truth. He told them what their grandparents had begun and their parents had sustained. He told them about the day humanity first encountered galactic civilization and discovered a universe more hostile than any nightmare. 2 centuries ago, he said, human researchers intercepted communications between Council species. They deciphered those signals and learned what awaited newcomers to the stars. They learned dozens of civilizations had risen before humanity, and every one of those civilizations had been conquered, enslaved, or eradicated by the Elder Powers. They learned the Council viewed expansion as a brutal, zero-sum contest in which only the ruthless survived. So humanity made its decision. They constructed a visible fleet of 500 ships. They outfitted those ships with weapons that appeared crude. They filled them with the Fossers who acted anxious and inexperienced. They presented themselves to the galaxy exactly as the Council assembled weak. Naive newcomers who had no idea how the real game was played. It was all deception. The true fleet was known as Project Prometheus. It was forged in hidden shipyards buried beneath the frozen moons of Jupiter and Saturn. It was constructed in asteroid mining complexes where Council sensors could never reach. It was assembled by workers who spent their entire lives inside classified installations, never speaking to anyone beyond their assigned clearance. Dr. Helen Carter spoke next over the channel. She outlined the technology Prometheus had developed while the galaxy believed humanity was struggling to produce primitive Estarft. The Council relied on nuclear engines that pushed their ships across space at respectable speeds. Human vessels used quantum drives that folded space-time itself, enabling instantaneous travel across any distance. The Council depended on plasma batteries and mass drivers that demanded enormous reactors. Human warships used directed energy systems powered by compact fusion cores no larger than a clenched hand. The Council required crews in the hundreds to run their capital ships. Human automation reduced that number to mere dozens, with artificial intelligences handling most combat operations. And Thenthor was the Wraith drive. Dr. Carter had headed the team behind it. Shahad spent 3 decades refining a technology that by all logic should not exist. The Wraith drive allowed a ship to slip partially out of normal space, becoming intangible and invisible at once. A vessel using the Wraith drive could drift through solid matter like a ghost passing through stone. It could emerge anywhere, strike without warning, and fade away before an enemy could respond. Captain Morgan listened to the briefing with fierce pride rising hot in her chest. She already knew nearly all of this. Every officer in the hidden armada had been told the truth upon accepting their commission. But hearing it spoken aloud in the edge of battle made it real in a way it had never been before. Commander Nathan Price delivered the final section off the briefing. He projected tactical overlays showing the location of every ship in Project Prometheus. The figures were astonishing. While the Council monitored 500 human warships, Thetru count exceeded 12,000. While aliens believed human forces were scattered and uncoordinated, they were in fact arranged in perfect formations around every Council homeworld. While the enemy Armada advanced toward Earth, expecting effortless triumph, they were sailing straight into the greatest trap in the history of warfare. General Stone spoke again. He said that humanity had waited 200 years for this moment. They had endured sneers and ridicule. They had swallowed their pride and played the part of simpletons. They had watched other species threaten their children and their worlds while they smiled and pretended to be frail. No longer. Tonight, he said, the ghosts would rise. Tonight, humanity would reveal, to the galaxy, what happened when a species was pushed too far. Tonight, the old gods would wake from their long slumber and show the Council the true meaning of fear. Captain Morgan tightened her grip on the arms of her command chair. Around her, the bridge crew waited, with a tension that bordered on agony. On 300 ships buried through the thawed Europa ice fields, 12,000 men and women braced for war. The Avalance engines began to glow. The Wraith drive thrummed with power that made the air taste like charged storm winds. Weapon systems that had never known real combat came alive with soft electronic murmurs. Lisa Morgan stared at the main view screen where distant stars shimmered, cold and ancient. Somewhere out there, 17,000 alien warships were closing in to annihilate her homeworld. They believed they were hunters descending on helpless prey. They were wrong. The light alien fleet crossed into the Sol system with weapons primed and shields at peak capacity. Admiral Vexner stood at the heart of his command deck, watching Earth swell larger on the screen. The small blue planet looked delicate and exposed. He could almost taste triumph. His communications officer reported that their force were transmitting surrender demands across all channels. Still no reply. The Humanitworks remained silent. The orbital stations displayed only faint power signatures. It seemed the entire world was simply waiting to be erased. Vexner allowed himself a deep, rumbling laugh. He had expected some resistance, perhaps a handful of bold idioset, tempting a futile last stand. The total lack of defiance wasn't early offensive. He ordered the fleet to move in attack pattern. Bombardment of the surface would begin within the hour. Then the heavens ripped apart. There was no other description. Space itself split open in 1,000 fractures at once. And through those ruptures came human ships, warcraft of patterns no Council archived had ever catalogued. They manifested inside the Allied formation, peering between Kraid Rednaughts and Sinandari cruisers, as though they had always been present. Captain Lisa Morgan commanded the first wave. The Avalon burst from folded space, flanked by 2,000 vessels of the strike fleet. Her weapons officer didn't wait for instructions. They had simulated this moment countless times. Every crew member knew precisely what to do. Quantum torpedoes streaked outward in expanding patterns, painting the void with trails of blue fire. These were not the crude projectiles the Council expected humanity to wield. These were weapons that existed partially beyond normal space, able to slip past shields entirely. They materialized inside enemy hulls and detonated with the violence of collapsing stars. 3/Akralith warships disappeared in the first 30 seconds. They didn't explode in any familiar way. They simply ceased to be, placed by drifting clouds, off superheated particles that had once been metal and tissue and dreams of domination. Admiral Vexnar roared. Commands his officers could hardly hear beneath the chaos. He demanded to know how these ships had appeared. He demanded to know his sensors had failed to detect their arrival. He demanded answers none could give. The human fleet fought unlike anything the Council had ever witnessed. They blinked in and out of space at will, striking from impossible trajectories. A Sinandari cruiser would lock onto a human vessel, only touch it, vanish a heartbeat before the fatal hit connected. Then that same human ship would reappear behind the cruiser and rip it apart with weapons that shredded shields like fabric. Commander Nathan Price led a strike team off 50 ships against the Veratheri command vessel. The enormous crystalline battleship was one of the largest warcraft in the Allied Armada, crewed by 3,000 of their elite warriors. Price and his squad annihilated it in under 4 minutes. They did not engage in traditional combat. They simply folded space around the battleship and deposited quantum charges directly within its engineering core. The explosion that followed was visible from Earth, a fleeting new star that blazed and died in the time it took to draw a breath. General Andrew Stone coordinated the strike from the Lunar Command Center. He observed his tacticality with grim satisfaction as decades of preparation came to devastating fruition. The enemy armada fragmented, their formations collapsing into disorder as vessels scattered in all directions. There was no hair to flee. Human ships enveloped the Allied fleet on every axis, cutting off escape as fast as it opened. The trap was flawless. Thepri had no path out. Dr. Helen Carter monitored the carnage from beneath the Rocky Mountains. She tracked casualties with the clinical precision of a scientist observing an experiment. 17,000 shipshad entered the Sol system. Within the first hour of combat, that number fell to 12,000, then 8,000, then 5,000. Admiral Wexner finally realized he was doomed. His flagship was rounded by human cruisers drifting like sharks around a wounded prey. His weapons scowled not strike them. His shields could not repel them. His engines could not outrun them. He sent a desperate plea for reinforcements across every available channel. He begged the Council homeworlds for aid. Hess screamed that humanity had deceived them all, that humans possessed technology beyond anything known to the galaxy, that everything they believed about Earth was false. His message went unanswered. The Council worlds had their own crises. Across 12 star systems, ghost fleets appeared simultaneously. They encircled every Council capital in precise formation. Thousands of warships materialized from empty spacious, if conjured by dark sorcery. No shots were fired. None were required. The message alone was sufficient. If the Allied fleet at Sol fell, every Council civilization would face identical annihilation. If humanity's demands were ignored, those silent ships would unleash their killing power. The galaxy had mocked Earth and judged humanity. Now humanity returned the favor. Captain Morgan maneuvered the Avalon alongside the crippled Worldbreaker. Admiral Wexner's flagship leaked atmosphere from a dozen ruptures. Its weapons were dead. Its engines were still. The massive dreadnought that had boasted of crushing humanity like insects now floated helpless, debris drifting in the void. Morgan opened a communications channel to the enemy vessel. She told Wexner Heckled surrender immediately, or die. She gave him 30 seconds. The great Kralith Admiral, who had laughed at humanity in the Council and promised to enslave their children, transmitted his unconditional surrender. In less than 10 minutes, within 6 hours, the battle was over. Of the 17,000 ships sent to destroy Earth, fewer than 2,000 remained functional. Most had surrendered. The rest fled for deep space, abandoning their allies in frantic escape. General Stone broadcast a message to the survivors. He ordered them to return to their homeworlds and report to their governments. He told them to recount exactly what they had witnessed in the Sol system. He told them to explain that this was the fate of any Onawo threatened humanity. Then he told them to pray that their leaders were wise enough to learn the lesson, because if not, the ghosts would come for them next. The scattered remnants of the Allied fleet vanished into the void. Behind them, that had lost every trace of arrogance. He asked how humanity had hidden their power for so long. He asked how they had deceived the galaxy for 2 centuries. He asked what kin of species could endure with such patience. Catherine smiled. She told him humans were masters of the long game. She told him that on a world where everything wanted to eat you, you learned caution. You learned to hide your strength until the moment was right. And then you struck without mercy. The years that followed were not easy. Trust had to be rebuilt between species that had been enemies longer than humanity had existed. Old hatreds did not vanish overnight. There were incidents and provocations and moments when it seemed the fragile lepes might shatter, but it held. Slowly, carefully, the galaxy began to change. Dr. Helen Carter retired to a quiet research station on Mars. She spent her remaining years studying the stars she had helped protect, writing papers on phenomena that will take centuries to understand. She died peacefully at 91, surrounded by students who had never known a time when humanity was weak. Commander Nathan Price took over the training programs at Sol Command, preparing the next generation of officers for a galaxy that might one day need them to fight again. He hoped they never would, but ensured they were ready. Admiral Lisa Morgan led humanity's Plick fleet on missions of exploration rather than war. She was the first human to set foot on a world in the Andromeda galaxy. 2 million light-years from Earth, she planted a flag there, gazed at alien stars, and felt pride in what her species had become. And somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, the Ghost Fleet waited silent, patient, eternal, ready to awaken again if the universe ever forgot. Lesson learned when they mocked Earth at the Council. On quiet nights, when the stars shone bright and the wind was still, people on Earth would look up at the sky and wonder if the ghosts were watching. They would wonder if humanity's guardians ever slept, or drifted forever through the void, keeping vigil over the small blue world that had defied a hostile galaxy and survived. The truth was known on Lido, the ghosts themselves, and they were not speaking. Yet on calm nights, when children asked their parents of booth lights above, the answer was always the same. Those were the Watchers, the Protectors. The old gods' woe awoke when humanity needed them most. They were the promise that Earth would never stand alone. They were the reason no one would ever mock humanity again.